And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of the Media Maestros pod. I'm one half of your team, Ram, with the one and only Ray, back again for episode number 16. And we're so glad to have you with us. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to check us out. Ray, how's it going, bro? How's life treating you?
Going pretty well. The school semester just started up recently, so getting back into that mode.
Back in the
But
books.
overall things are going pretty well. How about you?
It's going all right, man. Talking about school semester for me, the football season just started. I'm a lifelong football guy, so
Hmm.
it's like the skies have just opened and the sun shines differently. The grass smells different these days, but I'm excited, man. It's been a blast. But it's funny, speaking of that time of the year, you know, summer is officially closing, it's concluding. And it got me to thinking about a classic, Summertime. Summertime.
That is a classic.
The Fresh Prince, DJ Jazzy Jeff, 1991.
Hmm.
And with summer coming to an end, we in the Media Maestros really want to switch things up for you all and present a bit of a different experience. And we want to take a
Hmm.
deep dive into one of media's greatest, one of our favorites, one of entertainment's legends. And that is none other than Mr. Summertime himself, Will Smith. So we know recently he's been in the media for some controversy over the last maybe 3, 4 years, it seemed like.
Yeah.
And who better to start with? A media legend. Ray, what are your thoughts on Will Smith? What are some of your takes?
So one thing that's not deniable is the talent that Will Smith has
Yeah.
because he's been able to maintain a decades long career,
Yeah.
both in music. He had a hit television show and a huge movie star as well.
Yeah.
And, that's not something that you can take lightly, being able to stay relevant in the media and or not the media, but in media and
Yeah.
pop culture for so long and still acting, to this day. So, I gotta commend that.
Yeah. You talk about talent. As you all may know, there's a list of EGOT winners, EGOT being Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Awards, given to those that have essentially been recognized by the highest of those different levels of achievement. And Will Smith has been nominated for all four. He hasn't won all four, but
Mm.
he's been nominated. And that's a huge accomplishment thinking about the fact that his fingerprints are all over, a legend in music, a legend in film, a legend in television, and even a dabble or so on the stage.
Mm.
So Ray, I know you kind of had some thoughts about some of Will Smith's filmography, discography. Where you want to kick this thing off?
I think we should start by talking about um, best performances.
Okay. Okay.
So when we look at, a lot of his more dramatic roles, we see, because he did start off in comedy, we just see like, and this happens for a lot of actors, you have Jim Carrey, Steve Carell, well-known comedic actors that do their foray into the dramatics and have incredible performances. And, Will Smith has that as well. So I wanted to ask you, um, what would you say is your favorite or the best Will Smith performance?
So great point. I think Will Smith, and funny enough, as you take a look on Will Smith's career, I'm actually still learning. Will Smith was these days, I think he is most well known as an actor. His film career is definitely the most expansive of his accomplishments and his performances. But
Mhm.
he actually started as a rapper in the 80s.
That's
Will
right.
Smith, DJ Jazzy Jeff released four, if not five albums, if I'm not mistaken. So they had a long tenure even before he began his solo rap career. But of course, as we know, his biggest breakout was The Fresh Prince of Bel Air. I think that was his most pivotal, most notable performance
Mm.
as an actor. When I think of some of his film performances, you
Mm.
mentioned the comedy, which I think he may be most known for, but personally, I think his most impactful performance may have come from his role in Independence Day,
Wow. Okay.
which is, as you know, there's some comedic elements, but definitely more of a action, somewhat of a drama film. I also loved him in Men in Black, more on the comedy side, the silliness, the aliens, but again, another
Mhm.
action film. I think Ali was another role where he showed that he had some depth as opposed to just being a guy who can crack jokes and make silly humor. Those stood out for
Absolutely.
me. What would you say?
So for me, I could go pretty recent with this one. You have King Richard,
Mm,
the film where he's portraying Serena and Venus Williams' father. He
yeah,
actually got his first Oscar from that performance
yeah,
for
yeah,
Best Actor. A long time coming, a lot of people would say.
very
Um,
much so.
and I would say Pursuit of Happiness is a great
Mm,
dramatic performance. Him and his, on-star and real life son, and that journey, that emotional journey that character goes through.
legendary.
I would go something that's a little underrated that I really enjoyed, Focus, a movie
Okay.
that came out 2015.
Now, which one is
Uh,
that? What's that again?
so this is a movie. It's basically about this con man, Will Smith character, who gets together with this other con woman, Margot Robbie's character, and they're
Okay.
basically trying to get a. They have this like kind of heist thing that's going on, and trying to get this big mark. And the film has a lot of twists and turns because you don't know like if the character is, because it's about con people, if they're going to like come together and share the thing, or if they're going to like make a fast one and slip out,
Yeah.
how much you can believe them. I thought it was a really interesting film, and something that doesn't really get talked about in Will Smith's filmography.
That's a great piece. Thinking of something else that gets somewhat overlooked. What do you think about 7 pounds?
Mm, 7 pounds. Yeah, I put 7 pounds in Pursuit of Happiness kind of in the same boat of like when he was really getting into his dramatic bag. Um, I think it's a film that has that like really great reveal ending.
Yeah.
I don't really remember much of the movie until that point.
Yeah.
But I could definitely recognize that it was another great performance.
So, definitely thinking about some of the highs of his career. As I think with most great actors, especially who've had a tenure spanning 20, almost 30 years, there might be some misses too.
Mm.
Anything stand out, particularly as being forgetful?
You could go for maybe the later Men in Black sequels, like Men in Black 3.
Yeah, that
What the first one is a classic. The first one is a great action movie, but they just kept drawing from the same well, and that usually doesn't end well. No pun intended.
you know, I think you could say the same for his most recent Bad Boy film.
Okay.
It was one of those ones where, again, the well is dry. And I think we're in a day and age in media where originality is kind of losing its luster. So I think that was another example of maybe you're doing a little bit too much.
Right, right. Um, and then you have Hitch, which I don't think is necessarily a bad performance, but it's just one that really just sticks in my head, especially the the allergy scene where he gets the allergies and he's like drinking the vinegar
That
for
was
some reason.
legendary. That was
Yeah, that's
legendary.
just such a goofy and silly and fun moment. So he's just had such a variety of different roles,
Yeah.
where he's had to tap into different types of characters, and some of them have really um, had an impact, or they've become so iconic many years later.
Yeah. Great point. Really great point. I think it's easy to overlook, especially for those of us that may be under 30. And it's easy to overlook the fact that he has had such a tenure and such a run, but it's also been so diversified. I think people can in some ways not necessarily get typecasted, but get somewhat categorized as this type of actor, especially
Mm,
black actors, along the
right.
lines of an Eddie Murphy,
Mm.
Martin Lawrence, guys that are funny, they get casted into guys that are only funny and have no depth or breadth.
So, in thinking of, your favorite actors or who you consider the best actors, would you put Will Smith in the conversation of, let's say top five or even top 10 best actors of all time?
Great question. And I think it's one that I would say it leads you to be somewhat hesitant to say sure. I think you say a Denzel, people will say sure.
Yeah,
You say maybe a Al Pacino, people will say sure.
hmm,
Thinking about Will Smith's variety and his longevity, I think he deserves that same quick, no questions asked, yes. One of the
really?
top 10 greatest actors of all time.
Wow. I thought you were going to go a different direction there for a second.
I'm curious. What are your thoughts? What do you think?
So I think it's tough because there are a lot of really, really great actors who have been in a lot of great performances that may not have been in as many big movies as Will Smith has been in.
Hmm.
So, I think of actors such as Daniel Day-Lewis, Joaquin Phoenix, um, even like Jake Gyllenhaal, Ryan Gosling. I would put those actors in my top five because I feel like they just have more roles that I can emotionally connect with. And I guess maybe that's a bias for me that is what puts an actor at a higher level versus, someone who's in a great action movie but doesn't really have to do much in terms of um like really getting an emotional reaction from the audience. Like he has the few movies that we named, but you have other actors that have a career of those kind of movies. So that just makes it a little bit tough for me to put him in a top five. Definitely, you know, top I probably top 15, top 20 actors for sure.
So is the point that you're making that he has or he does not have enough kind of heart-wrenching, emotional, inspiring films, or the fact that he does not have the longevity of those type of films? Because I do think that scrolling throughout his filmography,
Hmm.
you go back to his first big film, which I think we would all agree on as Bad Boys, Independence Day, 95, 96. Two of, in some, Men in Black in 97. Three have kind of the same movies.
Yeah.
Ali coming in 2020 or 2001, his first somewhat, definitely serious, but more, somewhat of a biopic, but more weighty role.
Hmm.
And throughout his life, I don't think he has very few, if any, of those movies that are very, some would say deep, some would say thought provoking. Does that diminish his position as a great actor in your eyes, or what exactly do you think is keeping him from being in that top 10 unequivocally?
So I think I want to make a distinction because you did mention heart wrenching. And it doesn't necessarily need to be heart wrenching. It doesn't necessarily need to be that specific emotion, just a strong emotion. And I feel like with those films, they may be good films, but when you're looking at the performance, that performance doesn't really like the earlier ones that you named, the big action movies that you named, um, it doesn't have the same effect that a lot of um, maybe lesser known or more like low key actors have been able to consistently do throughout their career and don't have as many kind of um, not so well received films in their filmography, which he's just been in so many different movies that
You think that's to
it,
his detriment?
yeah, when I kind of compare it to like in Eminem, where he has those classic albums, but he's just been around for so long, and then he does also have like a few notable duds. So it makes it hard to put him in the same conversation as someone that doesn't have any duds, for me at least. But uh,
So how does that stack up with someone that doesn't have any duds but may only have one or two, or maybe two albums? That person
that
you would say deserves a higher praise than an Eminem who has three of maybe the best albums of all time, along with four or five forgettables. Because,
that's
for
a great.
example, as I think of Daniel Day Lewis, definitely a great actor. I think his performance in Lincoln is undeniable. But as I look at his filmography, I think he only has about 15, 16-ish roles upon which he's credited. When I look at a Will Smith,
Okay,
for example, he has about 40 roles spanning from 1992. So
right.
a 30-year run. Would you say that, or what is it do you think that Daniel Day-Lewis has that Will Smith is lacking?
I don't necessarily think it's something that one is lacking versus the other. Maybe it's just it could be a lot of things. It could be the roles that they decide to take. It could be, just the stakes that they will go in order to get into their character. Because Daniel Day Lewis is known as being an intense method actor, so he really lives in each role that he's in, and you see that on the screen versus an actor who might, you know, go a few years kind of just doing it for the check, not really caring about the quality of the movie, but just staying um, paid, staying, uh, in the staying in films through that era of their life and not, I basically I compare it to like a Kendrick Lamar who you can have someone that has had what, 5 or 6 albums at this
I
point,
think it's just five.
and 5 albums, and none of them are duds. So it would have to be more than two. Like it would have to be like something more extensive than, someone who's just starting out, like a Timothy Chalamet, who's still he's a great actor and he's been a lot of great performance, but he still needs more time to be in any conversation. But you have a lot of actors that are kind of both, and I think that um, is what hesitates me to put him in the super top, like the top of the top actors of all time.
Well said. Well said. I think that that's a great breakdown, a great introduction into your thoughts and your thought process. And I think ultimately it is a subjective question, which I think we'll all have our different answers and perspectives to.
Absolutely.
But I think no one can take away the fact that Will Smith is a legend in the game, a legend in the craft, and film has been where he's made his marker. But thinking of that,
Hmm.
Will Smith to have started in music.
That's right.
How familiar are you with the Will Smith discography?
Um, I'm probably just as familiar as anyone under 30. Like he has a few like hits, he has a few like great songs, but I've never felt the urgency to go back and listen to his catalog the way that I would for like a Jay-Z or a Nas, who everyone says like has a great discography, has great albums, classic albums. So I felt the need to go back and listen to that as a hip hop fan. But no one really talks about that with Will Smith. They talk about like the songs, Summertime being a big one, Parents Just Don't Understand, the Fresh Prince theme. Like those are great songs, but they're that doesn't necessarily equate to having a great discography. But how familiar are you with Will Smith's rapping career?
So I'd be lying if I said I was a huge fan. I'd be lying if I said I was more familiar than the average person under 30. But
Hmm.
I will say that I think Will Smith gets a lot of flack and he gets overlooked for being really one of the pioneers of hip hop.
Okay.
And that may sound a little dramatic, but Will Smith was one of the artists to break through and introduce hip hop to the world, which then led to the success of other artists like Jay-Z and Nas and guys that really made it very mainstream. I think about the Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff, the group, winning their first Grammy for Parents Just Don't Understand. That was a huge moment in hip hop at a
Yeah.
time where a lot of people like Run DMC and the Beastie Boys were totally overlooked as just fads or just, mischievous kids. I think for him to open up that lane is huge. And personally, I didn't know much about his music career even before his solo artist. So I'm relatively familiar with his solo albums.
Mm.
No, I like Big Willie style. I it sounds silly,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
welcome to Miami. Bienvenido a Miami. Like I'm a fan, but I think that we totally overlooked the fact that him and DJ Jazzy Jeff dropped about 4 to 5 albums as a collective
Yeah.
before they even got to the main stage and won Grammys and MTV Music Awards and American Music Awards and Soul Train Music Awards. Like that's a big deal. So I think the fact that he was able to have such an established career before his outbreak definitely deserves some credit, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that, as this year we're celebrating 50 years of hip hop, and we've seen different outlets give props to a lot of the originators and the OGs of hip hop. Will Smith should definitely be like celebrated in that sense as being a pioneer, as you were saying, and crossing over and making hip hop music cross over into pop culture the way that it did, as much as it did. Um, so I think that that is really the conversation that I go to Will Smith for in music and in movies, that he's just a really iconic, impactful, legendary performer. Um, is he the best in his craft, rapping, acting? He's really, really great, but the legendary aspect is something that you can't take away from the man. That's always going to be solidified with how much work he's put in.
And I think that's a great point. And one thing that I do somewhat fear is uh, not necessarily a history, but we live in a world upon which stories are shared. And when your story isn't told, it dies.
Mm,
And if we as a society continue to just only view Will Smith from the lens of great actor or, great performer, we lose the fact that he was a hip hop pioneer. And
yes.
especially when people overlook him in moments like the Hip Hop 50, and as we recall our list of some of the pioneers of hip hop, I think it's important to make sure we continue to have the discussion about his legacy as a hip hop artist.
I completely agree. But as we also know, he used that hip hop moniker, the Fresh Prince, turned it into, the legendary TV show. And when you think of all of the great sitcoms that we had, especially during that era, there were just a lot of iconic ones. Where would you put the Fresh Prince of Bel Air in the conversation of best sitcoms?
Great, great question. And definitely, I think there may be, or it may be worth specifying and even having a subgenre of best Black sitcoms, in an
Hmm.
age of Seinfeld and an age of Friends. Although those shows were somewhat different times, I do
Hmm.
think that it's worth separating and mentioning the fact that there was once a time upon which there were, or at least there was, a significant and a continuous and a very present Black sitcom genre. There
Yeah.
was the Moesha, and there was the Family Matters, and there was the Fresh Prince. And I think my top two, undeniably, are the Fresh Prince and the Bill Cosby or the Cosby Show.
Okay.
Two classics, both stand on their own. They've stood the test of time.
Mm.
They will live forever. Some of the stars of those shows have, their own interesting narratives, and I'll leave that there.
Okay.
But the shows in and of themselves, and especially for the time, were huge. So I think The Fresh Prince definitely stands in the top two of Black sitcoms. But I
Mm.
don't want to overlook the fact that those were just great sitcoms, period, and deserve to be mentioned in the top 10, the top five all time sitcoms. Where do you rank
100%.
it?
Yeah, like you were saying, just thinking of sitcoms of all time, it's definitely got to be in the top 10 for me. I mean, it may be blasphemous, but I could throw Friends out of here, throw Seinfeld out of here.
Personally,
Like,
I agree. I agree.
like it could stand alone as one of the best sitcoms. It's just, it's so hilarious. You have all of these iconic moments that are hilarious, but then it can really get into that deep bag, which a lot of great
Yeah,
sitcoms do. Why don't he want me, man?
man,
Like,
legendary. I'm about to cry right now.
yeah, and no, not a dry in the house when that came on, man. It's a great show. It had a great tenure, a lot of great supporting characters.
Legends.
Carlton, the butler, forget his name.
He
Uh,
was Jeffrey on the show, but I forget his real
yeah,
name.
but it's a full show, and you could just put it on, watch it anytime. A lot of it really holds up. It teaches a lot of great lessons too,
Yeah,
different lessons, but
yeah.
in life in general, but also as being African American and in this country, it has a lot of lessons talking about that as well. It's really, really just a quality television show, period.
Yeah, and I mean 6 seasons for the show to have the impact that it did. And this is another moment where it's lost just how impactful it was for us under 30. I've heard stories that this was one of the biggest shows, and we've seen the documentaries. This was one of the biggest shows in the country, not
Mm,
just amongst Black people, not just amongst young people, but period. This was on NBC at the time, I believe. This was a huge show, and it can't get overlooked just how big it was. And the legacy, as we know, has lasted so long that the remake has taken over Peacock these days.
that's right. Have you watched that show as well?
I have, and I think we may have discussed it on on the pod. It's
Mm,
been one of my most impactful shows that I've enjoyed on Peacock, that I've enjoyed in the recent times. And for it to be a recreation just speaks to the impact that the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air had some 30 years ago.
100%. So, any final words on Will Smith?
Will Smith, as I think you've said, we both said multiple times, is a legend. His legacy will live on forever. And
Mhm.
before we go, it wouldn't be the Media Maestros if we didn't leave you with a blast
Blast from
from the
the
past.
past.
And this is, as you all could probably guess, it's quick, it's succinct. Summertime 1991, the biggest single from DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Check it out. I feel like it's required listening at least once every summer. With summer coming to an end, there's no better way to end the summer and no better way to end this episode of the Media Maestros pod. We thank y'all for checking us out. We thank y'all for following along. If you have any thoughts on Will Smith, the Fresh Prince, let us know. Comment, share, hit us up in the DMs. Until next time, peace.
Yeah.